Good afternoon and welcome, students, faculty, and staff to California State University Northridge. My name is Perlita Varela, and I have the privilege of serving as the Facilities and Commercial Services Chair of the University Student Union's Board of Directors. As evidence of the broad-reaching interest in today's event, a variety of collaborators on campus are responsible for bringing Mr. Vargas here today, including the Campus Quality Fee Student Allocation Committee, including the following students: Holly Hawk, Luda Gogolushko, Eric Lara, Sydney Powell, and Darian Valdivia. Associated students, Educational Opportunity Programs, the Journalism Department, Gender and Women's Studies, Civil Discourse and Social Justice, Dreams to be Heard, Matters for Equality, Filipino American Student Association, and the University Student Union. On behalf of all of these groups, we welcome you today to today's highly anticipated program, Define American, with journalist, activist, and undocumented immigrant, Jose Antonio Vargas. I feel honored to welcome Mr. Vargas to Cal State Northridge today. Actually, President Harris had hoped to be here herself to welcome Mr. Vargas, but due to prior commitments, she was unable to attend. On her behalf, I welcome Mr. Vargas to our campus for what is sure to be a stimulating conversation. Today's program could not have come to a more appropriate time or to a more appropriate campus. As we all know, CSUN is a diverse campus, and the national debate about immigration reform has very real implication for many members of our community. Jose Antonio Vargas is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and founder of Define American, a campaign that seeks to elevate the conversation around immigration. Born in the Philippines, he was sent to live with his grandparents in California at the age of 12. Vargas immersed himself in American culture and excelled in school. When he applied for his learner's permit, he discovered his green card was fraudulent. Vargas then realized he needed to hide his true identity to avoid deportation and pursue his American dream. Vargas has written for such prestigious news organizations as The New Yorker, The Huffington Post, The Washington Post, and The Rolling Stone. He has appeared on several national and international television and radio programs, including Nightline, The O'Reilly Factor, and The Colbert Report. In 2011, Vargas wrote My Life as an Undocumented Immigrant, which exposed his story in the June issue of New York Times Magazine. Today, he is here to share more about his story. Please help me welcome Mr. Jose Antonio Vargas.
There's a lot of people here. What's up? How's it going? Thanks for that wonderful introduction. As a proud graduate of San Francisco State University, class of 2004, that's where I went to college. As a proud graduate of the Cal State University system, the largest and definitely the most diverse university system in the country, I'm really proud and humbled to be here today. And I'm proud and humbled to ask what I think is one of the core questions about immigration reform. How do you define American? I think it's a very simple and complex question that confuses and I think frightens some people. Before I continue, I really want to frame from my perspective what I hope is a conversation. And I'm really looking forward to your questions. We have some mics set up here. I don't really consider myself an activist or an advocate. I'm not a leader. I am not an organizer. What I am is a storyteller. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a writer who's spent more than a decade as a journalist. And in this nearly 2 years kind of experience now going around the country talking about immigration, there are times that I still wish that I was just writing a story, that I wasn't so much a part of the story, that I'm just like working on this really long article and on a film. But it is what it is. And actually, the story that I've been telling landed me in Alabama in the fall of 2011, shortly after Alabama out Arizona, by passing the most draconian immigration law in the country. I don't know if you know this, in the state of Alabama, it was a crime just to even be in the state and be undocumented. If you're an American citizen and you drove me, it would be a felony for you to transport somebody like me. So I went up, going to Alabama for a few days, and what ended up happening was I just talked to a lot of people, and some angry people. And to me, what was so interesting is that I was in Birmingham. This was the epicenter of the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, right? The same Alabama that 50 years ago this year launched something called Project C, C for confrontation, which was a historic assault to end segregation in the Jim Crow system 50 years ago. And I think remembering our history is so central to this whole conversation on immigration. And so often when I've done interviews with Bill O'Reilly or Lou Dobbs or gone on conservative radio, because I'm crazy, I end up talking about Ellis Island, America's first immigration station, where nearly 1 out of 3 Americans can actually trace their European ancestors, right? Between 1892 and 1954, I would say on these shows, 12 million undocumented white people crossed the border called the Atlantic Ocean and landed on Ellis Island. They didn't have papers, they just showed up. They were inspected, if they knew any English, if they had any money, and most of them were welcomed. And I find it really interesting that here we are, nearly 60 years after this Ellis Island closed as an immigration station, we're faced with the migration of another 11 to 12 million people. This time not just from Europe, but from all over the world, especially Mexico, who cross a different kind of border. But then you have to ask questions like, who crossed whose border first, right? Like, remember when California and Arizona were actually owned by Mexico? Remember when the Philippines, where I was born, was actually a U.S. territory, like Puerto Rico? And I always get kind of caught up because I feel like 2 very big questions, fundamental questions, rarely ever get asked on television and on radio when immigration comes up. One of the questions is, what do U.S. foreign policy and trade agreements like NAFTA have to do with migration patterns? Why are people moving? That's a big one. The second one, why is immigration always presented as a problem and never as an opportunity? In an interconnected, globalized world that speaks many tongues, don't we want as many different people as possible with many different sorts of skills in this country? I think those are pretty basic questions. So I talk like this, and then usually I get a lot of hate mails. Like, I'm used to hate mails. Like, I average maybe 20 a day. Facebook, Twitter, and the emails. But this one kind of took the cake, and I want to share it with you. The subject line is, "Get out of my country." The email goes, "Senor Vargas, gather your things and pack them in a suitcase and get the hell out of America. The U.S. Constitution is for American citizens," so it's all caps, which means that they're like yelling at you, "not Mexicans, El Salvadorians, and Guatemalans. I have followed your anti-American bigotry for quite some time now, along with your homosexual bullshit, I'm also gay, that you spit thinking anyone would feel pity for someone else's issues. A lot of great Americans have died fighting against enemies to protect the citizens of this country. You are an enemy of the United States of America. Do me a favor and don't speak about America or the U.S. Constitution because you're not American and it's not yours and you wouldn't understand it for obvious reasons. The Declaration of Independence is written for Americans. Not whatever you are, it's okay, you're not American. It's mine and my fellow brethren. Not some scumbag who shows up and demands all this shit. I'm sorry, it's her language. For my tax money. Fuck you, and I hope you get AIDS quickly, since your rate is 99.9% risk rate. So let's forget the grammatical mistakes. No, it's okay. Like, a lot is 2 words, not 1. Not everybody has a copy editor. Like, it's fine. But this is real. I found her on Facebook and friended her. She has not accepted. So how do we start? So let me start here. I am in America, like many of us, because of the sacrifices of my family. My grandparents, my lolo and lola, as we say in Tagalog, legally immigrated from the Philippines to Silicon Valley in the mid-1980s, legally. A few years later, my grandfather, Tio Pilo, became an American citizen and changed his name to Ted, after Ted Danson in Cheers. Sometimes you gotta know where everybody knows your name. Because grandparents cannot petition for their grandkids, it's not considered to be a close enough of a relationship. And because my mother could not come to the United States, my grandfather saved up enough money to get his only grandson, that was me, a passport and a green card to come to America. My mother gave me up to give me a better life. I actually arrived in the United States not too far from here, well, a few miles from here, on August 3rd, 1993 at the Los Angeles International Airport. I was very confused. I thought I was in the wrong country. Because, in the Philippines, when I think United States, I didn't think it was gonna be like Asian people. Or like kind of brownish people. I didn't know what they were, because we didn't have Mexicans or Latinos in the Philippines. We were all Asian in the Philippines. I'd never seen, quote unquote, Mexicans or Latinos, right? I thought I was in the wrong country. And what was even more frightening for me was just this idea of identity. When I came here in 1993, my introduction to American culture was Nancy Kerrigan's knee getting whacked, the O.J. Simpson trial, and Seinfeld. I thought everybody was Jewish. The dog food aisle at Safeway really confused me. In the Philippines, we fed dogs leftovers. We didn't feed them with canned foods that cost as much money as people food. So that was confusing to me. The other confusing thing was, flag football and the national anthem. I actually thought the national anthem said, "Oh, Jose, can you see?" So I thought it was about me. I was like, I just got here and they're so friendly. Like, what? My classmate, Sharman Curl, actually looked down and said, "Dude, Jose, we're not talking about you." And what was most interesting was in this mostly black and white and Latino world, where does this chubby Asian kid with a Latino name fit in, right? I grew up, like many of you probably did, in the Proposition 187 era, the grandfather of laws like Arizona's and Alabama's, right? When California voted to bar undocumented immigrants from going to public schools and hospitals. I remember in 1995, sitting in my science class at Crinan Middle School, when I called him Mexican Jose. There were 2 Jose's, Mexican Jose and Filipino Jose. And Mexican Jose said, "Hey, Jose, do you have your green card?" He carried his green card with him because his parents, I guess, were afraid that someone was gonna check, so he carried his green card with him. And it was the first time I actually was asked that question. And I'm like, first of all, the card wasn't green, so I was kind of confused. And the second thing, I was like, why would I carry it around? And then Mexican Jose says, "Oh, but you look Asian, then you don't have to worry about it then." I never thought about it. The irony, of course, was that 2.5 years later, when I was 16, when I went to the DMV to get a driver's permit and I showed the woman my green card, she said mine was fake. So that's when I realized that Mexican Jose and Filipino Jose were actually on the same boat. The next 2 years were probably the most critical years for me. The following year, my English teacher, Mrs. Doer, said I was asking too many annoying questions and I should do this thing called journalism. I had never heard of what journalism was. We didn't read newspapers and I couldn't write English all that well. But then she sent me to this journalism camp. And when you're a journalist, there's a thing called a byline, when you buy Jose Antonio Vargas. And I was 17, and I'm like, wait a second. If they said I can't be here because I don't have the right papers, so what if my name is on the paper? Like, I figured that means that I existed because my name was on a piece of paper. So why don't I just write a lot of these stories? I've written like 800 news stories since I was 17. How can they say I don't exist, if I'm all over Google? I've interviewed Beyonce, Al Gore, Hillary Clinton. I've written for some of the top news organizations in this country. How can they say I don't exist? That was one salvation in my head. Then the next year, when I was 18, during U.S. history class, we watched this documentary called The Life and Times of Harvey Milk. I don't know if you know this documentary. The last line of the documentary says, "If a bullet should enter my brain, let that bullet destroy every closet door." And I was sitting in the back of room 102, and I don't know what happened to me. I raised my hand and told the class, blah, 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 I'm gay. And then I stormed out and went to the bathroom. And then my girlfriend found out during brunch that this had happened. I couldn't stay in the closet about two things at once. I had to get out of one of them. So I got out of that one. But it really ruined the plans of my grandfather. My lolo was planning, the same grandfather who paid $4,000 to get me to America to buy a fake passport and a fake green card, said that the plan was I was supposed to work under the table jobs, like at the flea market, maybe, and marry a woman and get citizenship that way. Like Sandra Bullock in The Proposal. You just marry your way into it. But I told him that I wasn't going to do that. And sometimes, people that love you most can hurt you most, and so he kicked me out of the house. And really, he was worried for me. So even though I came out of that one closet, it took me 12 years to come out of another one. And I was able to do that. I was able to lie my way into getting jobs because of two pieces of documents with two sets of numbers. The first one was a thing called a Social Security card that my lolo actually bought for me. How much it didn't cost, I don't know. All I knew was the number wasn't valid for work. But when I told my lolo that I wanted to work at the Subway to make sandwiches, he drove us to Kinko's, and he cut a piece of white tape, and he put it on the top of the line that says not valid for work, and we made 20 photocopies. So that's what I gave the San Francisco Chronicle, the Washington Post, the New Yorker, and the Huffington Post. And I remember doing this each time, thinking, wait a second, isn't anybody going to know that this is what I'm doing? To my surprise, instead of hearing from INS, or ICE as we call it now, I actually heard from IRS. The IRS doesn't care whether or not I have papers. The IRS cares whether or not I pay taxes. And I don't know if you know this, but undocumented people like me, workers like us, paid, for example, $11.2 billion in state and local taxes in 2010. Here in California, where at least 10% of workers are undocumented, undocumented people paid $2.7 billion in state taxes in 2010. That's $178 million in state income taxes, $735 million in property taxes, because we own property, and $1.8 billion in sales taxes, because when you and I go to Walmart, we pay the exact same tax. So aside from the Social Security card, I ended up also needing to get a driver's license. When the Washington Post offered me an internship, they said, you can't show up here without a driver's license. I was at the time 22, and I really wanted the job. My lolo said it was too much of a risk, but I said, I want to go. So I spent 10 hours at the Mountain View Public Library, and I printed out the requirements for the DMV for each one of the 50 states, and realized that the states of Tennessee and Oregon had the most lenient requirements. All I had to do was show them my ID card from San Francisco State University and a pay stub and some letters that prove that I lived in Portland, Oregon. And off I went to Portland and got the license. The license lasted 8 years. It expired on February 3rd, 2011, which happens to be my 30th birthday. And my plan in my head was then I had 8 years to prove myself. I thought I could write my way into America. I thought I could just succeed my way into citizenship. I thought that was the goal. And at the same time, the DREAM Act, this thing called the DREAM Act, right? It used to be 21 and under, then 25 and under, then 28 and under, then 30, then 35, and up and down, and you're waiting while they're playing football with your life. And my turning point, at least one of my turning points, was when I profiled Mark Zuckerberg for The New Yorker. It was the biggest writing assignment of my life, and I was writing for what I thought was the most prestigious magazine in the country. And you know, Mark Zuckerberg is not like that guy from The Social Network. He's actually a social, friendly guy. Spent about 2 weeks with him. And at one point, while I'm interviewing him, he starts interviewing me. And we were walking down California Avenue in downtown Palo Alto, and he goes, "Jose, dude, like, where are you from, man?" I physically stopped, and I think I gave him, like, one of my eyebrow looks, you know? And, I mean, I was just like, I was done in my head. I think I was just done. You know, there I was interviewing the Facebook guy, writing for this magazine that I've always dreamed of writing for. And he asked me this question, and I couldn't answer him. Now, the answer was simple. You know, I'm from Mountain View, like a town away. But I know that the answer was more complicated than that. Because I know that I haven't been able to see my mom. At that point, I was almost 16 years. I knew that the life that I was trying to lead was kind of falling apart. So I ended up coming out again, and this time doing it in the biggest way that I possibly could in the New York Times. Some of you may have read the article. And to illustrate, I did this to illustrate the complexity of the immigration system here in America. To show people that whenever you talk about immigration, it's not just about the US-Mexico border. My border was the Pacific Ocean, so I don't know what you're talking about. That immigration is actually about family. Like, I'm Filipino, we're like the Italians of Asia. We have huge families. You're laughing, there's a lot of Filipinos in this room. So out of like 20 people in my family, I am the only person in my family who is undocumented. I'm part of what people call a mixed status family. So that's the reality of immigration in America. 17 million people live in a household where one other person at least is undocumented. More than that, I was able to survive because of a network, a community of allies. The first person I ever told I was undocumented was my high school choir teacher, Mrs. Denny. She said the choir was going to go to Japan for a tour, and I told her that I couldn't go because I didn't have the right passport, and she goes, "What do you mean you don't have the right kind of passport?" "I don't have the right kind of passport." Then I told her, and then the next day she told the class we were going to go to Hawaii instead. I graduated high school in 2000, a year before the DREAM Act was introduced. So when my high school principal found out that I wasn't applying to colleges, she kept bothering me about it, and then I finally tell her. And then she's like, "All right, why can't we adopt you?" At that point, she wanted to adopt me. My Mexican mother wanted to adopt me. My black mom wanted to adopt me. I had all these women who wanted to adopt me, and I was over the age of 16, so they couldn't adopt me. So my principal and my high school superintendent found a venture capitalist to pay for my college for 4 years. So if you think about it, if every undocumented person in America has at least 3, 4, or 5, or 6 teachers, mentors, coaches, pastors, neighbors, friends, who are helping them out every day, then we're talking about an issue that impacts way more than 11 million people. And actually, as I've been traveling around the country, that's been like one of the most special things. I was just in Minnesota at the St. House of Hope Church. And this blonde woman was waiting for me outside, and she had this envelope. And she said, "Mr. Vargas, I wasn't sure if I was going to get to meet you, so I have an envelope for you." And next to her are these 3 Latino students. And she goes, "I've had them since they were in 3rd grade." She's an elementary school teacher. When she found out that they were undocumented and couldn't go to college, she created a scholarship fund called Walter Swish, after her Chihuahua Walter. I'm not kidding. Can you imagine how many people are like that across this country? Yet, do we ever hear from them? Are they a part of this conversation? Right? Immigration is more complicated than legal versus illegal. It's not black or white. It's living in limbo and living in a gray area, making choices, asking for compassion. What would you have done if you found out that your license was fake when you were 16? I'm just happy I didn't get into drugs. I'm just lucky that I kept moving on. Why did your parents do what they did? Cross the border or lie or get the papers? I'm reminded by Marco Rubio, who's going to be really critical to this conversation. Marco Rubio, like any aspiring president, wrote a book. And he called it an Immigrant Son. And in this book, there's this really fascinating quote. Let me read it to you. "Many people who came here illegally are doing exactly what we would do if we lived in a country where we couldn't feed our families. If my kids went to sleep hungry every night and my country didn't give me an opportunity to feed them, there isn't a law, no matter how restrictive, that would prevent me from coming here." How I hope this compassionate rendering would make its way into policy, particularly in the Republican Party. So here I am, I write this big essay that people seem to have read. I go to Colbert, I talk to Lou Dobbs and try to control myself. I travel around the country, I've done about 100 events in 25 states, even crashed a couple of Tea Party meetings. I'm a walking uncomfortable conversation. And I'm a journalist asking questions, and now people are asking me questions. In Iowa, where I ended up going for a few days to talk to Republican caucus goers, the question that I got asked most was, "Where did my country go?" They would ask. They're asking me this question. My name is Jose Antonio Vargas. It doesn't get any more Latino than that. But I look Asian, a cross between Yao Ming with some Jeremy Lin mixed in. You live in California, you know how it goes. When you see an Asian person with a Hispanic name, that means Filipino. I'm gay. In college, I majored in political science and African American studies because you cannot understand American history without understanding African American history, in the same way that you cannot understand American history without understanding Chicano studies. This being the home, of course, of the godfather of Chicano studies, Rudy Acuna. And I'm undocumented. I should just marry a Jew or a Native American and call it a day. So my question is, what is this anxiety really about? Is it about the fact that white people are a shrinking share of the US population? About the fact that slightly over a third of Americans belong to minority groups? And what's more, nearly 50% of kids under the age of 18 in America are not white. Nearly 50% of kids in America under the age of 18 are not white. Every 30 seconds, a Latino in our country turns 18 and becomes an eligible voter. Every 30 seconds. The US Census reported that for the first time, children born to racial and ethnic minority parents represent the majority of all new births, outpacing those born to white parents. In 21st century American politics, diversity is destiny. Let me repeat that. In 21st century American politics, diversity is destiny. You live in California. I grew up in California. As California goes, so goes the rest of the nation. We are all now minorities, which means in the state that none of us are because the minorities now make up the majority. And for me, that's a good thing. It's a great thing, something we should celebrate. But as I've traveled around the country, for a lot of people, it's a confusing, frustrating time. And here I am traveling around the country, wondering why nothing has happened to me. No one from ICE or the Department of Homeland Security contacted me or has contacted me. And people around the country ask me questions on Facebook and Twitter, on email, asking questions like, why haven't you gotten deported? So I decided that, like any journalist, I would write about it. So I contacted the editor of Time magazine and I said, I want to write a story about why I haven't gotten deported. And he's like, are you nuts? What is there to lose now? And I ended up writing the story that in some ways I structured after all the questions that I have gotten asked in the past year and a half. And these questions underscore the fact that immigration is the most controversial, yet least understood issue in America. People simply do not know how it works. Question number one, why haven't you gotten deported? And as you probably know, President Obama, the same president who got here to this country because his father from Kenya was an immigrant and got here on a student visa, that same president has deported more than 1.5 million people in the past 4 years, more than any other president, more than President Bush himself. He deported nearly 400,000 people in fiscal year 2011 alone, and I wasn't one of them. And neither are many other undocumented young people, dreamers, who in the past 5 years have come forward and said that they're undocumented and unafraid. They inspired me and they inspire me. Another question I would get asked is, so you're not Mexican? Though roughly 60% of the estimated 11.5 million undocumented people are from Mexico, the rest are not. A full million of the 11 million are actually from Asia, Philippines, Korea, China. 300,000 are from Europe, undocumented white people. 800,000 from South America, from the Caribbean, from Africa, from all around the country. Here's probably my favorite question. Why don't you just make yourself legal? I'm a masochist, and this is like so much more fun, you know? I'm craving attention. And whenever I get asked that question, I would usually look at them and like, there isn't, no matter how many times our politicians tell us that people like me should get in the back of the line, for however reason, a lot of journalists just can't seem to ask the follow-up question. Where's the line? There is no line. The only option for somebody like me right now is to go back to the Philippines, accept a 10-year bar, and try to come back. I could try to marry a man, because New York State allows same-sex marriage, but the federal government has this thing called the Defense of Marriage Act. So the federal government, which issues visas, wouldn't recognize my marriage. So basically, I tell people I'm screwed both times. The other question is, do you think you belong in a special class of people who can break any law you want? I got asked this question at a Tea Party meeting. And the man that asked me the question was this really polite lawyer. And he said, so I read that you got a driver's license fraudulently. If I did that and wrote about it in the New York Times, I'd go to jail. You're going around as a criminal talking about this. I looked at him and I said, you know, sir, I didn't get the driver's license to spite you. We don't get a driver's license so we can wave to Americans, see what we can get away with? I got a driver's license because I had to cover the Iowa caucuses and there's no buses in Iowa. I got a driver's license because, you know, we got to go to work. We got to drop the kids off to school. We have to get groceries. And he was like, oh, I never thought about it like that before. And here's to me the most pernicious one. What about illegal don't you understand? So we can talk about the inaccuracy of the term. Being in America without papers is a civil offense, not a criminal one. We can talk about that. We can talk about the fact that in a country that believes in due process of the law, calling an immigrant illegal is like calling a defendant awaiting trial a criminal, right? We can talk about the fact that calling people illegal is actually imprecise, especially right now when the president issued deferred action to undocumented young people. So the Dreamers, if you qualify for deferred action, have temporary status, which means that they're not illegal anymore, as the Los Angeles Times still managed to call them. But I think for more than any other reason, something is terribly wrong when we call people illegal. Actions are illegal, not people, never people. Illegal is used as a slur, a way to criminalize people, particularly Latinos. When really that's someone's mom you're talking about, that's someone's dad, that's someone's uncle, that's someone's family. No human being is illegal. It's as simple as that. No human being is illegal. And the question that I got asked, mostly among young people in places like New Hampshire and Georgia and Arkansas, is why did you come out? Why are you doing this? So I've come out twice in my life, and I'm totally done. I'm not coming out anymore. I'm done. I have nothing more to come out about. But we are not really coming out. We're just letting you in. We're just telling you what it's like to live in this country, to pledge to that flag, my flag that I grew up pledging to pay taxes, to contribute, to be with my family, to live in a country that dares you to dream big and yet limits your opportunities. That's why we're letting you in. So when I ended up writing this article, the photo editor at Time Magazine said, well, so we're going to put your face on the cover. I said, no. I'm really self-conscious. I didn't really want to see my face on the cover of Time Magazine by myself. So I said, hey, why don't we invite 30 other people? And the photo editor was like, where are you going to find them? Are you kidding me? Like, how am I going to pick? So I ended up going on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, calling activists like Gabi Pacheco, calling people, dreamers around the country, and in a span of 5 days, we had 35 people flying across the country to get to a photo studio in New York City to photograph for Time Magazine. So that's 36 dreamers from 15 different countries. Nigeria, Germany, Israel, yes, an undocumented Jew, he's wearing his yarmulke. Guatemala, Brazil, the Philippines, Mexico, Korea. I don't know if you know this, 50 years this summer, this August is going to be the 50th anniversary of the March in Washington, of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. 50 years this August. That was actually in my mind 2 weeks ago as I was preparing to testify in front of Congress, in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. The night before the testimony was President Obama's State of the Union address. And the National Day Labor Organizing Network invited me to this really interesting conference of about 300 immigrant day laborers, domestic workers, hotel workers, many of whom are undocumented, 300 of them, all gathered watching the State of the Union address at the Washington Hilton. This is actually what's called the Hinckley Hilton in Washington, D.C., where President Reagan almost killed. And it's the same Hilton where every spring, kind of the official Washington, it's called Nerd Prom, the Washington White House Correspondents' Dinner. In that same hotel, 300 mostly undocumented workers watching the State of the Union address. And Obama, in the speech, says, the time has come to pass comprehensive immigration reform. Everybody applauds. A beat later, real reform means strong border security. Boo. After the speech, I'm standing there, and some of the people recognize me. They knew that I was about to give this speech and testify as an undocumented immigrant in front of Congress. and they said, don't forget about us. I'm on deportation proceeding. My daughter got deported 2 years ago. I'm not as successful as you are. I didn't go to college. I've aged out of the DREAM Act. I don't speak English like you do. I don't look like you. Please don't forget about us. I heard about 200 messages, Facebook, email, text messages, phone calls, telling me just that. And of course, in my head, how could I forget? My faith, as privileged as I am, and I am, I've worked really hard to get to where I am. My faith is tied to often faceless, nameless abstractions. So as I testified in front of Congress, and behind me, by the way, directly behind me was my grandmother, my Lola, who flew in from California. She was joined by my aunt and my uncle Conrad, who served in the US Navy for 20 years and showed up at the Hart Building of the Senate wearing his uniform from the Navy. All of them American citizens. They showed up. My high school principal, my high school superintendent, the guy who paid for college, they all sat behind me as I gave the testimony and as I talked about our collective dreams. The fact that we dream of a path to citizenship so we can actively participate in our American democracy. The fact that we dream of not being separated from our families and our loved ones, regardless of sexual orientation, no matter our skill set. All this talk about high-skilled and low-skilled immigrants get me really, really mad. I come from a farming family in the Philippines. There is nothing low-skilled about farming or babysitting or mowing lawns. We dream of living a life with dignity, of being treated as human beings, whether or not we have the right green card, passport, or social security card. You know, back in Alabama, when I was there, when Proposition HB 56 got passed, this really, really anti-immigrant law, I ended up interviewing a guy named Lawrence Calvert, who's a Republican, who's a farmer, who lived through the civil rights movement in Alabama. But he has a friend called Baco, who's also his worker, who helps him harvest sweet potatoes. And they're so close, Lawrence and Paco, that there's actually a room in Lawrence's house called the Guatemalan Suite, where Paco and his family stays. And so I asked him about what kind of Alabama he wanted. We don't often hear voices like his in this conversation. Because sometimes I think too many of us think that immigration is just a brown issue, a Latino issue, a Mexican issue, maybe an Asian issue. We don't think it's a white issue or a black issue or really an American issue. So I guess the question that I have to ask you is, what is your role in this whole thing? Like, where do you fit in? And of course, you know, I'm a student in the civil rights movement, and I'm reminded by the work of Martin Luther King and James Baldwin and Ella Baker. And a quote like this from Martin Luther King, in which he says that history will record that the greatest tragedy in this period of social transition is not the strident clamor of the bad people, but the appalling silence of the good people. So, are you an ally? Do you consider yourself an ally? Do you know somebody who's undocumented? Are you a part of a mixed status family and haven't spoken up about the fact that there's someone in your family who is undocumented? As we debate immigration in this country, the question really is the nature of citizenship. How do you define American? So we're sharing stories. I've shared mine. Sometimes I wish that I didn't, because sometimes it's really hard. You feel kind of naked in front of people. It's weird. But I'm doing my part because all of us have to do our part. One last thing before I start taking questions. I don't have any legal form of ID besides a Filipino passport that the Philippine Embassy gave me shortly after I disclosed my status. I don't have a driver's license. They took it away. I don't have a California ID or a New York ID. All I have is my Bank of America card, the cover of Time magazine, which I carry with me sometimes just in case anybody asks. and a Filipino passport. This is what I use to travel to get through the airports. Now, mind you, since it's a Filipino passport, and all I got to do is show the ID, if they did flip it, and they're like, oh, there's no visa in this, they could actually arrest me. Now, it's a Filipino passport. I know of many people using Mexican passports who get arrested and detained and deported. But since it's a Filipino passport, and since I look like this and I talk like this, they don't think I'm one of these illegal people. I'm an American. I'm just waiting for my country to recognize it. When I was in high school, I saw a movie called The American President. I'm not sure if you know what this movie is. Michael Douglas was president, Andrew Shepard. And he gives this speech at the end. Andrew Shepard in the movie says, America isn't easy. America is advanced citizenship. You really need to want it bad because it's going to put up a fight. So I'm fighting. A lot of us are fighting, and we need you to fight with us. If you stay silent, you are only a part of the problem. If you don't speak up, nothing will ever change. And thank you so much for coming here today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
My name is Maribel Serrano. I'm also an undocumented student. I'm actually going through the deferred action process right now.
So wait up a second. So how long have you been an activist? Have you been an activist since?
2007, I found out I was undocumented when I tried to get my first job, and I found out that I couldn't. And I had to kind of find I've always been very honest, very transparent. So it was very hard for me, feeling like I had to live a lie, and I had to go through like these different avenues and try to figure my way out, you know? So I wanted to make a film for a really long time, but I never felt safe until the president came out with the executive order, and finally I felt like, okay, it's time to, you know, put it out there. So that's why I made it.
You know, I felt like such a coward all these years. You know, I don't know I'm surprised, frankly, that I never just blurted it out.
My name is Oscar.
You're
Ortega.
Filipino?
No, I'm not.
Oh, you're not? Oh, I'm sorry. You look like my cousin, so.
And I crossed the border as well, some 27 years ago. So I know what you're talking about. And I hope you get to see your mother. I never got to see my mother, okay?
For how long? So you never?
I've been here for 27 years. I became a legal citizen probably some 10 years ago. But I never get to see my mother pass away, so I really hope you get to see your mother.
I'm really hoping to.
My question to you is that in an interview with NPR,
Yeah.
Congress Raul Labrado of Idaho,
I'm sorry, who is this?
it's a congressman from Idaho.
Oh, from Idaho. Okay.
Yes, he said he wants immigrants to get legal status that stops short of citizenship. Can you give me your take of that? Would you compromise your activism for just a legal status and not getting a citizenship?
Have you seen Lincoln, the movie Lincoln with Daniel Day-Lewis? It's a really great movie. We've done this before. When America said that black people were 3/5 of a man, when we had the Chinese Exclusion Act, when we've treated people as sub-citizens. This is not America. And the congressman from Idaho is not going to get anywhere with that. Now, if you're going to tell me that I have to wait 5, 8, 10, 13 years to be a citizen, right? If you want to make me a permanent legal resident and give me a green card and give me a path to citizenship, I had a really interesting conversation with a friend 2 weeks ago who has a startup in the valley, in Silicon Valley. And he's like, Jose, dude, like, I love you, man, but if we want to recruit an engineer to come here and help us, it takes a long time for these highly educated engineers to finally have green cards. So would you wait longer than them? It's a good question. I will wait for what is fair and what is reasonable. What I am not going to wait for is Washington playing theater what was really disconcerting for me, and Marco Rubio has to be kind of careful. So the White House proposal gets leaked, and Marco Rubio slams it and says it's dead on arrival. And then, of course, a day later, the Miami Herald reports that Marco Rubio's plan mirrors the White House plan. So why? Right? I understand that we need Republican buy-in. I'm going to spend the rest of the next few weeks and months going to as many Republican places and talking to as many Republicans as I possibly can. The era of preaching to the choir, it's important for us to empower each other and to get organized, but unless we talk, to people who don't quite see the world the way we do, we're not going to change. So I'm going to be doing more of that. And I will not settle for anything for a sub-citizenship. That is not the America that I've gotten to know, and it's not the America that I think we want.
Question that I have for you is, I think that you do a great job of highlighting the fact that this is not a Mexican issue, a Salvadoreño issue, Guatemalan, you name it. This is not a Latino issue. I think that you do a great job of highlighting that. How do we work to change that myth or that stereotype that this is only affecting Latinos, that this is only on Channel 34?
This is where, and mind you, I think for me, it's been very important. I'm so late to the game, not the game, but I'm so late to this. I look at the activists and the dreamers that have spent years and decades fighting for immigration reform while I was sitting at my cushy desk at the Washington Post making a lot of really good money. And so I have to come at this, and I try to come at this with as much humility as I possibly can. Having said that, sometimes I feel like we have not created the space to let other people, other Americans talk about it. Let me give you an example. So I was in Seattle a few months ago, and my friend, who's a teacher there at this public school system, she did this great thing. She organized a meeting of all the ESL, kind of ESL learners group. So about 40 teachers showed up, mostly white, 4 Latinos, 1 Vietnamese woman, right? And so there I am, I'm talking to them about this, I'm talking about the fact that, I say this as a fact, if it were not for my teachers, I don't know what I would have done. My Lola and my Lolo were so scared. They just wanted me to marry and wanted me to not go to college. Not because they didn't want the best for me, they were just scared for me, So here I am talking to them, and we're talking about this, and this really sweet lady at the back of the room raises her hand and she goes, white woman, she goes, I'm just not sure I'm supposed to talk about it, because I'm not Hispanic. And then this Latina woman at the front of the room, Gloria, goes, well, you have to talk about it. Because I'm tired of going to the superintendent's office saying we have to do immigration reform. Oh, here's Gloria again, the brown woman, talking about immigration reform. Can you imagine if you went there with 5 or 6 other white teachers and said, this is our issue too?
My question is, with how social media and trends pick up so fast and how slogans and pictures can move throughout the world so quick, do you believe that this immigration reform, this could possibly be the first bill or any type of paperwork to be done through social media to have that type of exposure?
That's a really good question. I started covering social media in 2006 before they called it social media. And I actually don't like that phrase. I think it's just media. It's just there's a me in media. And people using Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube is them being their own news channel, right? Look, I love the Los Angeles Times. The Orange County Register, it's okay. No offense. But to be perfectly honest, overall, the media has really failed us on this issue. This is why, by the way, I do Fox News as much as possible. I don't do MSNBC and CNN anymore, just because I feel like I'm just preaching to the choir. But whenever Bill O'Reilly calls, I show up. because he has 2 million people watching him every night. And after I go on Bill O'Reilly, I usually get an email from the president of the Nebraska Tea Party Association saying, please come, let's talk. I'm like, sure, I'll come. Just make sure that, there's like security. I'm kidding. But what I'm getting at is it's more important, more than now than ever, to share our stories within our networks of people, right? Like, do you ever call out like a classmate or a teacher or a coworker or a friend whenever they say something that's just inaccurate, right? That the fact that we have to play media on each other. What's your facts? Here are the facts. Those are really the only ways we're going to educate each other, because the media is going to do what it's going to do. The media has boxed this in as this brown issue. Now, mind you, I got to tell you, when I was in Georgia and they also passed kind of a copycat law that looks like Arizona's law. Mm-hmm. I did an event, and there was this one woman who showed up, Mexican woman born in this country, who started like shaking because she was recounting the day that she forgot to carry her driver's license and drove away. She was panicking that some cop was going to stop her and ask for her papers just because she's brown. She's an American citizen. If we don't insist on educating people within our grasp, right? If we don't call them out, like if we don't, Mark Zuckerberg told me once that, the news feed on Facebook? He said, it's the newspaper of the people around you. I'm like, psh, whatever. Sure, great slogan, Mark. But then, of course, I come out as undocumented, and now I've gone to, you're only allowed to have 5,000 actual friends on Facebook. And I've gone to a point now where I have to defriend American citizen friends so I can keep adding undocumented friends, because it's my best newspaper. I know what's happening in Mississippi, in Alabama, in South Carolina, because the Dreamers, right? There's this great group in Miami that just started called Dreamers Moms. Facebook group called Dreamers Moms. So the Dreamers, the mothers of undocumented young people, started getting together, and they're like, hey, we should tell our stories too. So now they're on Facebook, and they're recruiting people. It's amazing. And I went to their first face-to-face meeting in Miami, like right after Christmas. Can you imagine about 50 mothers in one room sharing their stories about what it was like to come here and what it was like after their kids found out they were undocumented and had to explain to them why they did what they did? And I'm sitting there thinking, can we please get this on The View, like right now? And have Whoopi interview them? Like that kind of stuff. So yes, I think this is going to be the time in which social media and people telling their stories to their networks and communities, I think it's going to be a game changer. I mean, I hope so.
I know you just talked about how you won't settle.
Yeah.
And what is it, if you have, since you're so involved in the subject, what is it that you would like to see as far as laws passed that you feel would be satisfying enough? And my second question into that is, I know earlier you spoke about how, we've been hearing about this DREAM Act for years and years and years. And since you're so involved, what do you think the likelihood of how much closer we are to actually getting this DREAM Act passed?
I'll take the second question first. Now, I am for the DREAM Act. I am for anything that lets people out of the nightmares that they're living in, right? But the DREAM Act is only one slice of a much bigger and much complicated pie. And I think we have an opportunity to actually address the whole issue and not just, no offense to the college-educated people in this room, but not just address the DREAM Act. I think we have an opportunity to do that, and I think the opportunity is now. As for what the policy looks like, I am all for anything that allows people like me to come forward, right? The proposal in the Senate, the Gang of Eight, I don't know, we have to call them gangs, but Gang of Eight in the White House said that people like me should come forward, learn to speak English, it's pretty good, pay back taxes. I have paid so much taxes, I should be a Republican. I paid a lot into Social Security. I would actually even argue, and there hasn't been a report, that undocumented workers probably have kept Social Security solvent. I would argue that. So pay taxes, learn English, and get in the back. Don't bump people off who have been waiting for years to become documented, right? So if you want me to wait 7 or 8 years so that people who have been waiting longer can get documented, I'm fine with that. So I'm okay with that proposal. Now, the policy of this is actually not that hard. The harder part is the politics of it, the posturing that has to happen, right? The Republicans say, oh, they don't want the president to get credit for it, so the president has to make room for the Republicans to try to save this thing. The Democrats, who have used immigration as an issue for more than a decade now, are relying on it to win votes. Everybody's posturing. But the American public is ready for this. Poll after poll showed that the American public wants a path to citizenship for the 11 million people in this country. So we have to insist, as citizens of this country, documented and undocumented. Citizenship doesn't come with papers. I am a citizen of this country. I know I am. So we have to insist that something has to happen. So that's the policy of it.
As I sit here and I think about immigration, a lot of the immigration reform supporters like to, they always point to the economic side of things.
Yes.
And I always want to, it's kind of a torn thing. It's an economic side, but it's also more of a social taboo, and it runs along the lines of race and racism almost. And I'm from Arizona. I grew up in Arizona, and I was kind of for the State Bill 1070, the controversial immigration reform bill. I was looking into that, and the major lobbyist for the passing of that bill was the prison lobby.
Yes.
And that just highlights the economic side of illegal immigration, is that it's almost a business in essence.
It's a complex, yes.
Yes, to, indict people and charge them with embedding illegal immigration. Also, I have here with me, this is off of Sheriff Joe Arpaio's website, and this is verbatim from
Don't
his
you just want to give
immigration
him a
issue.
hug?
Oh, God, I hate that.
You just want to
now.
give him a hug. Make him some
This
lumpia
is-
or adobo and just chill out,
This is verbatim. This office aggressively enforces all local, state, and federal laws in order to combat growing illegal immigration epidemic in Maricopa County. Deputy sheriffs are specifically trained to identify indicators that a person or persons might be in this country illegally without violating their constitutional rights. How does that make you feel?
And this is where I get, leaving Arpaio aside, because I think he just really wants a Fox News contributing contract, Leaving him aside, and let's focus on the president, for example. I think it's really interesting that the president talks about border security and the fact that we must secure the border when illegal border crossings are at its lowest level since the 1970s. There's actually a net, people are actually moving to Mexico because the economy is getting better, right? So no one talks about that. And no one talks about the fact that here we are, we say to Mexico, keep out, and then 10 yards in, we have a flag that says $2 a day to pick something or to fix something. So I just described something that's really complicated, and Arpaio is talking about what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And again, I think this is where, I gotta tell you, and I know this now because I've done this for about a year traveling around the country. I believe that the American people are kind, compassionate people. Even like, for example, one example. So when I was in Cedar Rapids and this couple at the Mitt Romney rally found out I was undocumented, they're like, have you called Senator Harkin? Governor Harkin can help you. Like, have you tried to get help? I'm like, yes, ma'am, I've tried to get help. I'm sure somebody can help you. I'm like, well, can you please talk to Mitt Romney and say to stop using self-deportation because it doesn't exist? But the problem is our politicians and our media in some ways have really gotten in the way. So then what happens is we beef up people like Arpaio, who, no offense, is a clown, and treat what he's saying as gospel. And by the way, since you're from Arizona, so not to blame you, of course, but the fact that Maribel, who has DACA, right? Jan Brewer doesn't want, DACA says that people who are eligible for deferred action can apply and get driver's licenses. Jan Brewer, as the governor of Arizona, in her infinite wisdom, doesn't want to honor that. Now, my challenge is, undocumented students and dreamers and immigration activists in Arizona who are as badass as anybody in this country have been fighting for a long time. So when are other Arizonians going to join them?
As you say, like they build Arpaio up to be this, this spokesperson
This leader.
against illegal immigration, and he's in his department he has a human smuggling unit, and in essence it's going in and just busting families who are here illegally to deport them, but they word it in a way to make it seem like it's protecting Arizona citizens and our society against illegal immigration.
Somewhere up there, George Orwell is like rolling up and down the grave because of just what we've allowed ourselves, the kind of poisoning and corruption of just the mind and the consciousness that's what we've allowed to happen. And again, like the activists and the organizers are doing everything they can, but until we get, quote unquote, the ordinary American who doesn't know about this to know about it, and to think that it's their issue, nothing is going to change.
And
So that's going to be your job.
I've told people now that I'm undocumented. I've used your story as a cover, actually. And
As a
when
cover?
they tell me, Cesar, well, you're one of the good ones. And I don't know how to explain to them that my classmates, who unfortunately, they got involved in drugs or in gangs, how do I plead their case? Where even among the activists and the politicians who support the DREAM Act, who support immigration reform, how do I tell them that these people who went to school with me, who are my neighbors, that they also deserve a chance to make over their lives? Because from what I understand, they're going to be left out. They have records. What do we do there?
The fact that you're speaking up and saying that, that's one thing. And can you imagine how many, I feel like we've all been a part of this really, like we all got in an accident of some sort. And some people made it out, and some people haven't made it out. And I, for one, I have a really bad case of survivor guilt. That's, those emails, being called names, that, I'm okay with that. I'm a writer. I have thick skin, But when I think about the entire generation of people that we've lost, I was at the University of Georgia in Athens. I did an event because the college Republicans invited me to come. So, hey, come. So I came. And the first question came from a young man named Gustavo Madrigal, who said that when I came out in the New York Times, he read the story, and then he wants to be a journalist, and he read everything I ever wrote, and I'm like, oh, that's a lot. And then he goes, but Jose, I don't speak English like you do. I don't write like you. And what if I'm not as smart as you? Am I worth saving too? Yes, of course. This is not about model minorities or, at the end of the day, people just want to live at home and provide for their family and have food on the table and live life with dignity. So what we have to fight for and insist on is human dignity. And we need to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, I'm done. Thank you so much for coming. I hope this was useful.